I woke to the soft hum of my coffee maker and the faint winter light slipping through the blinds. At 60, I had settled into a life I could call my own quiet mornings. In my small Neepville home, a stack of novels on the kitchen counter, and a modest garden out back that kept me busy enough to feel accomplished without feeling tethered. My weekdays were filled with volunteer tutoring at the local library, some casual bookkeeping for old friends, and the occasional brunch with Jessica, my friend of 30 years. Most of all, I cherished the autonomy I had fought for after decades of putting everyone else first. The house was neat, almost sterile in its order, but I liked it that way. Each object had its place, each chore its schedule, and for a brief stretch each morning the world felt like it belonged to me alone. But beneath the calm there was a simmering irritation that never quite went away. Weekends weren't truly mine anymore. My daughter-in-law, Marissa, had a habit of dropping by with her 7 children without notice. Assuming I would welcome the chaos as part of family duty, I tried to be patient, telling myself it was only for a few hours, only for a moment of convenience, only because I loved them. Still, the pattern was wearing me down. Even after retirement, after raising my own children, after giving years to support a family that sometimes seemed to forget I existed outside their needs, I felt the familiar tug of obligation pressing against the thin walls of my independence. I sipped my coffee slowly, forcing myself to enjoy the warmth. But in the back of my mind, I could already feel the weekend creeping closer and the exhaustion it promised. I set down my mug and glanced at the calendar where Saturday was already marked with the subtle reminder of family expectation, and I realized that this weekend would be no different than the last. And so I began to plan for what I might do differently this time. Saturday mornings had become a ritual I never signed up for. Marika would appear at my door, car packed with 7 kids, all chattering and jostling for attention. No warning, no call ahead, just that familiar wide smile she always wore as if to say, "You're the best aunt in the world. So this is fine." And for a long time I went along with it, out of loyalty, out of habit. And because deep down I told myself family came first, I could still see the Saturdays from a few years ago when my back ached from chasing after the twins, or when I'd skipped a lunch or a nap just to keep them entertained. Those afternoons had left me drained, sitting on the couch with a throbbing head, feeling both proud and invisible at the same time. Each time I tried to speak up, Marika would wave me off with a laugh, and my own children, grown now and far away, were never there to back me up. The house, once a sanctuary, became a playground. Noise bounced off the walls. Toys scattered across the floor, and I found myself constantly moving between the kitchen and living room, making snacks, refereeing arguments, wiping noses. At first I reminded myself it was only a few hours that these kids were family, that I had done much harder work in my life. But lately, the patience that once came naturally felt like a thin veneer over a rising tide of resentment. I had begun to notice how my weekends disappeared without any acknowledgement of the effort it took, how my suggestions for help or scheduling were gently dismissed, and how the very things I had sacrificed for decades were being treated as if they were owed. I loved these children, but the exhaustion and subtle guilt were growing heavier each week, and I realized that accommodating their needs at the expense of my own had become automatic, unquestioned, and increasingly unbearable. I sank into my favorite chair, taking a deep breath, and wondered how I could reclaim even a sliver of those precious weekends. The next Saturday would arrive, and I knew it would be the same. But this time, I had begun to consider doing things differently. I decided it was time to speak up cautiously, but firmly. One Friday evening, after the children had been picked up and the house was finally quiet, I called Marissa. I tried to keep my tone light, as if suggesting a minor adjustment rather than confronting a long-standing pattern. "Marissa, can we talk about the weekends?" I began. "I love spending time with the kids, but I need to plan some Saturdays for myself. Maybe we can schedule visits so I can have a break now and then." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that makes your stomach tighten. Then she laughed lightly, almost dismissively. "Ellaner, you know these kids adore you. You're practically part of the family every weekend. I don't see why this is such a big deal." I tried to explain that I needed personal time, that it wasn't a rejection of the children, but my words seemed to evaporate into the phone. "You don't have a husband or kids of your own," she continued. "So this is easy for you. You have time. We work hard all week. You can spare a few hours for family. Can't you?" I felt a flush of frustration and guilt, the familiar tug-of-war between my own needs and the expectations I had internalized over decades. I wanted to preserve harmony, to avoid conflict, but I also wanted to assert that my time and energy were valuable. The next Sunday, I decided to try again, this time speaking to my parents during dinner. "Mom, Dad," I said, hesitating slightly. "I've been feeling overwhelmed with the kids every weekend. Could we consider a rotation or some schedule that lets me have some free time?" Helen looked up, fork in hand, and gave me that disappointed look I knew so well. "Ellaner, we raised you better than this. Marissa works hard. She deserves time with her husband. You're single. You don't have those responsibilities. Helping family is part of life." George nodded silently. Marissa chimed in from across the table, insisting it was simple, that I could manage both the kids and my personal life. I smiled politely, trying not to let the frustration show. But inside, I felt a gnawing sense of being undervalued and taken for granted. I cleared my plate, knowing that my quiet resistance had failed, and began to wonder if things would ever change. The approaching Christmas holiday loomed ahead, and I sensed that the stakes were about to rise even higher. It was early December when my phone rang with Mom's familiar, cheerful tone, the kind that usually carried good news or a simple question about dinner plans. "Ellaner." "Darling, we're planning a big Christmas celebration this year," she began. I smiled politely, already bracing myself for the details. "Your sister Marissa and Rick are inviting everyone, and of course we'll have all the kids here, 7 of them, plus any cousins and aunts and uncles who can make it." I listened carefully as she outlined the plan. "We thought it would be wonderful if you could take care of the catering. You've always managed family gatherings so beautifully, and you do such a great job with the kids. We'd really appreciate it." My stomach sank. Catering for 25 people, plus supervising 7 children. All on Christmas Eve, I began running numbers in my head. The deposit alone would be over $1,000, and the final cost would nearly double that. Beyond the financial strain, the thought of standing in the kitchen preparing food while managing chaotic little hands and endless questions felt like a weight pressing down on me. I tried to mask my hesitation. "Mom, that's quite a lot," I said cautiously. "Are you sure everyone will be okay if I handle this?" "Oh, Ellaner, we wouldn't ask if we weren't sure," she replied brightly. "You're so reliable, and you've always done so much for the family. It's just one day, and it will make everything perfect." I felt the familiar tug of obligation, the sense that saying no would be considered selfish, ungrateful, even unloving. It wasn't just about the cost or the effort. It was the expectation that my generosity was limitless. Week after week, Saturday after Saturday, I had given my time freely, and now it seemed the holiday was just another opportunity for my family to take it for granted. I hung up the phone and sat down heavily, pressing my fingers to my temples. A wave of frustration and exhaustion rolled over me, and for the first time in years, I wondered if there was a way to step back without being seen as unkind. The pattern had become painfully clear. My family assumed my time, energy, and resources were always available, never questioning or acknowledging the strain it caused me. I rose from the chair, staring out the window at the quiet neighborhood, and realized that this Christmas would be a turning point. Something had to change before the holiday arrived, and I knew I could no longer follow the script my family had written for me. I decided to drop by my parents' house that evening to discuss the catering details in person. The drive through Neepville was quiet. The streets dusted with early December snow, giving everything a deceptively peaceful appearance. I kept rehearsing what I would say, trying to keep my voice calm and measured. I didn't want another confrontation with Marissa over minor scheduling issues, but I needed clarity before committing to the Christmas chaos. When I arrived, I let myself in with the spare key I'd had for years. The house was warm, filled with the faint scent of roasted vegetables and pine from the small tree in the living room. I was about to call out when I froze, hearing my name from the living room. My parents' voices carried clearly, but there was an unfamiliar note of amusement I couldn't place. "Oh, Linda, Cameron will be perfect for watching all the kids." I heard Marika say, "Don't worry about bringing any activities. We'll just set up the back bedroom with movies and games. She can stay up there with all 7 children while we adults relax downstairs." I pressed myself against the wall, my stomach tightening, my heart started racing. 7 children upstairs alone all day. My face burned with a mixture of disbelief and rising anger. My parents chuckled in agreement, praising my supposed patience and energy. "She has the stamina," my mother said. "She's used to it every weekend." After all, I sank into the hallway trying to process what I was hearing. It wasn't just that they were expecting me to watch the children. It was the way they treated it as inevitable, as if I had no other life, no personal needs, no right to rest or enjoyment. Years of subtle exploitation and overlooked sacrifices flashed through my mind. The Saturdays, the dinners, the extra tasks taken for granted. Every small act of generosity had been assumed to be unlimited, unconditionally available. Anger coiled inside me, sharp and insistent. I realized that this Christmas, like so many weekends before, was going to be yet another example of their entitlement, a day in which my time and effort would be used as a backdrop to their enjoyment. I felt the familiar tug of guilt, but it was muted by a growing determination. I backed quietly toward the door, my hands shaking, and knew that something had to change. I could no longer allow my family to dictate my life. Not for holidays, not for weekends, not ever again. I stepped outside into the cold night, gripping the door handle, the first seeds of a plan forming in my mind, ready to reclaim control of my Christmas. The next morning, I began considering exactly how I would do it. I sat at my kitchen table the next morning, the phone in my hand, staring at the number for the catering service. My heart raced, but a sense of clarity had replaced the fog of frustration I'd felt for weeks. I took a deep breath and dialed Romanos. "Yes, I need to cancel the entire Christmas Eve order," I said, firmly, surprising even myself with the steadiness of my voice. There was a pause on the other end, followed by polite disbelief. "Cancel the whole order, ma'am. Christmas is only a few weeks away." "Yes," I replied resolutely. "Please process the cancellation. I'll handle the holiday differently this year." The administrative formalities were brief, and soon the confirmation arrived. About half of the deposit would be returned, but the larger point had been made. I was no longer consenting to being the family's unpaid caterer or babysitter. I sank back in my chair, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over me. The thought of facing my family's anger loomed. But for the first time I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself in years control. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Jessica Torres's number. We had talked back in September about her family's cabin in the mountains of Colorado. At the time, I had declined, assuming I would be spending Christmas with my family as usual. Now that invitation felt like a lifeline. I tapped the screen and called. "Cameron." "Oh my goodness. It's so good to hear your voice, Jessica." I explained the situation briefly, emphasizing the last-minute nature of my change of plans. Her response was immediate, enthusiastic, and freeing. "Yes, come. You'll love it. We have space, snow, everything ready for a perfect Christmas. Just get here when you can." The warmth of her voice settled something inside me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't a caretaker, a provider, or a background figure in someone else's story. I was choosing my own joy, my own peace. The fear of judgment or backlash lingered, but it was outweighed by the sense of agency I had reclaimed. I hung up and began packing lightly, thinking of snow-dusted pines, quiet trails, and evenings by the fire. An entirely different kind of Christmas. The decision was made. I would go. By the next morning, I had set my plans in motion, ready to leave the expectations of my family behind and step fully into my own holiday. The drive to Jessica's cabin felt like leaving a heavy weight behind. Snow-dusted pines stretched alongside the highway, and with each mile the tension I'd carried for weeks began to ease. Arriving at her family's property, I was greeted with warm hugs and laughter that instantly put me at ease. For the first time in years, I was here as a guest, not a caretaker, not an organizer, not someone expected to manage everyone else's day. The cabin was cozy, but spacious, with a roaring fire in the stone hearth and the smell of fresh pine mingling with the scent of holiday treats. The children ran around excited to show me their sledding skills, while Jessica and her siblings moved effortlessly between cooking, decorating, and organizing games. No one asked me to do anything I didn't want to. My presence was wanted, not assumed. We spent the days skiing down nearby trails, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs with a sense of exhilaration I hadn't realized I'd missed. In the evenings, we gathered around the kitchen table to prepare meals together, everyone contributing and laughing as we chopped vegetables or stirred hot chocolate. There was no hierarchy, no expectation that one person shoulder the burden while others relaxed. It was a balance I hadn't seen in my own family for decades. Board games stretched into the night, stories and jokes bouncing around the cabin. I felt included in a way that was restorative, validating the decision I had made to step away from my family's demands. The joy was pure, unburdened by obligation or guilt. I could simply enjoy myself, engage with others, and share in the laughter without managing the chaos or resolving conflicts. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the cabin had become a sanctuary, a space where I was free to exist without the familiar pressures and manipulations of Chicago. I felt lighter, empowered, and more connected than I had in years. As I sipped my hot chocolate by the fire that evening, I knew this freedom could not last forever. My family would call, my obligations would beckon, but for now I allowed myself to fully embrace the holiday on my own terms. Tomorrow I would face them, and I would be ready. I had barely returned from Colorado when the phone began to ring insistent and loud. The familiar voices on the line were sharp, urgent, and filled with accusation. My mother was first, her tone brittle with anger. "Ellaner, where are you? Everyone is waiting for you." And the catering. What happened? I took a slow breath, letting the calm I had found in the mountains settle over me. "Mom, I'm not coming. I made other plans," I said evenly. Her disbelief was palpable. "You're abandoning the family. Christmas Eve is ruined without you," she insisted. My father's voice followed stern and disappointed. "This is unacceptable. We've counted on you for years. You can't just—" I held up my hand, cutting through their chorus of complaints. "I've been counted on for decades. Yes, I've given every weekend, every holiday, every expectation without pause. But this year I'm choosing differently. I will not cater. I will not supervise. And I will not be treated as an unpaid servant for your convenience." The line went silent for a moment, and then Marika's voice rang sharp and incredulous. "Ellaner, you can't just leave us with all 7 kids. This isn't about you. We've planned everything so we could relax." "I understand your plans," I said firmly, "but I am not part of them. I love these children. But my time, my energy, and my peace are not up for negotiation. If you cannot respect that, then I will not participate." I could hear the disbelief, the sputtering attempts to guilt me, the sharp intake of breath as they realized this was not going to be one of the usual negotiations. I felt a surge of something unfamiliar, satisfaction, clarity, empowerment. I was standing firmly, articulating a boundary I had avoided for years, and I could feel its weight lifting off me. After the calls ended, the room felt still, the usual tension replaced by a quiet certainty. I knew that there would be consequences, upset voices, and perhaps even resentment. But for the first time, I realized that protecting my happiness required saying no to manipulation, that my own well-being could not be sacrificed for the comfort of others. I hung up the phone and sank into my chair, letting the realization settle. The next holiday, the next weekend, and every moment I had previously given without thought could now belong to me. Tomorrow, I would begin rebuilding my life on my own terms. The next days were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I blocked the persistent calls from my parents and Marissa, letting the silence replace the usual tension that had filled my phone. My mornings became my own again, reading, tending to my small garden, and enjoying the slow rhythm of independent life. Afternoons were spent visiting friends, volunteering at the library, or exploring new parts of the city I had never taken time to notice. Evenings brought a comfort I had almost forgotten, the ability to cook for myself, without expectation, to pour a cup of tea and read without interruption, to simply be. The weight of years of automatic obligation lifted gradually as I realized that family love did not demand the sacrifice of my own happiness. Establishing boundaries had not made me cruel or unloving. It had restored my sense of self-worth. Travel plans with Jessica and other friends filled the calendar, and I felt a joy that was mine alone, earned through courage and insistence on respect. Independence no longer felt lonely. It felt freeing. I reflected on the holidays I had spent as a caretaker, the effort given without question, and I understood that empowerment came not from acquiescence, but from knowing when to say no. And as the days unfolded, I embraced the knowledge that my life, my time, and my peace were finally my